If you could describe Lowell in 3 words, what would you describe it as?
In 3 words, so I would say scrappy, I would say blooming, and I would also say struggling.
Mm.
And so Lowell has a lot of history going back to the 1830s when young women start coming to Lowell to work in the mills, and so that's a history that I really like. I teach a labor history course, and so it's sort of an add-on to that. I loved having my students come along as well, so that get off campus and get into the community. So that's one I like, and the other one that I like, I've worked for a while on sort of the black history of Lowell, particularly before the Civil War. Lowell, most people never realized until we started doing the research, Lowell was a stop on the Underground Railroad when fugitives, when escapees from the institution of slavery were heading north to Canada. Lowell was one of the places that people would come along the route that they would take to ultimately end up if they were going to stay in Canada. And a lot of people ended up staying in Lowell, so there was a fairly significant fugitive community in Lowell, and doing research we've uncovered that through Lowell Telecommunications. We actually made a documentary, a 40-minute documentary on that history, and really looking at that contradiction between the fact that the mills in Lowell are using cotton produced by the labor of enslaved people, and at the same time there's this very large and robust anti-slavery movement in the city. And so it's an interesting walk because it's very contradictory.
Yeah.
Actually, the title of the documentary is A Contradictory Place.
Yeah.
Because it sort of bumps up, history sort of doesn't make sense to people when we first start talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, how could you use all this cotton in the mills, and in the very mill we're in, where now LTC is. And yet lots of the young women were very much engaged in anti-slavery activity.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you point that out, because I feel like a lot of times when people talk about the good parts of Lowell, they also neglect to talk about the other parts of Lowell that we don't really talk about too, and just kind of focusing on the intersectionality but also the duality between those things too. So
Yep.
That's something I didn't even know, and that's really interesting too.
Yeah, well, most people, I mean, it's not something that, like, if you go through the National Park and you go through the exhibits, if you're a school kid coming to Lowell, which a lot of kids around here do, to learn the history of the city or whatever, it wasn't for a long time something that was in the forefront when you went through the exhibits. You would talk about cotton, and but like, where did it come from, and sort of any of that, and as well this movement in opposition. Now, because we've been revealing the history and doing a lot more work, the St. Anne's Church, which is right near where we're talking this afternoon, had an Underground Railroad stop in the basement of the church. The minister of the church, Theodore Edson, was one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement in the city, and he was a very prominent minister, and spoke out all the time against the institution of slavery. Frederick Douglass, who many people know as a person who was a fugitive himself and then became a major leader in the anti-slavery movement, came to Lowell and spoke on many occasions, but you wouldn't necessarily know that. There's not a marker or something that said Frederick Douglass was here.
Yeah.
There should be.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree.
And so we're working now, there's a community group, the Free Soil Arts Collective, and I've been working with them, and they've been in the forefront of trying to get signage and get like a Black History trail put up in Lowell to go along with some of the other stuff that's here.
Yeah.
So that's happening. It's taking a while, but it's happening.
That's really exciting to hear too. And then you were saying about the church being one of the stops. Are there other stops in Lowell too?
So there were farmhouses that were out over in the neighborhood in the city called Pawtucketville, over toward where South Campus of the university is. Sort of if you go out up along the river, there were a number of places that were known stops. There was also a fairly significant African American neighborhood in Lowell off Central Street, for people that know the city. That's since been torn down under urban renewal, but that was also a place where people lived. There were also a number of businesses that fugitives started. came to Lowell stayed. So there were barbers, hairdressers, carpenters, other people that were fugitives that were known as escapees, and people behind the anti-slavery movement in Lowell protected them. Slave catchers would come to try to catch people and return them to the South, and nobody was ever returned from Lowell. Lowell is fairly unique. Lots of other places, slave catchers came and grabbed up people and took them back south. Nobody was ever taken in Lowell. They were protected when they needed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really important history that's just
Yeah.
not, it's somewhat neglected, but the documentary actually won a national award from cable access channels all over the country. There's a big national organization of public cable access TV stations, and it won, last year it won like a best documentary prize.
Wow, that's
So I'm
really
pretty proud
exciting.
of that. We're sort of, so after that, we started working on looking at the indigenous history of Lowell. And so starting now, actually they're being put up all over North and South Campus. There's signage that's going up on the history, Native American history of the land areas where the university now sits. And so all of that is going to be slowly over the next 2 or 3 weeks. All the signs will be up. There'll be about 8 signs at different locations around campus. One of the things that we uncovered is where on North Campus, where Southwick Hall is, one of the big main buildings on North as you walk over University Avenue Bridge. It's that big orangey yellow building,
Yeah.
that really long building. That was a Native American burial site. And when they were digging up the ground to build that building, they basically disturbed the graves and dug up bones,
Yeah.
and disturbed the burial site. And so we're shedding some light on that, trying to get students especially, but also people in Lowell to understand where we sit and sort of what was here before us. They're going to be scattered around campus. There are actually a lot of the historical research that was done by students working with faculty, myself and Professor Strobel in the history department, and then Professor Ingrid Hess, who's in the design program. She worked with a student, and the student helped to design the signs. And so it's been very much a student sort of collaborative with faculty project, and so we're very excited that the signs will, shortly they'll be up. So by Indigenous Peoples Day in early mid-October, the signs will pretty much be up around campus.
Yeah, I'm super. Do you have a specific moment in history you love to teach about the most, or a couple moments or time periods?
No, I don't. I mean, I like all of it. I mean, I like finding things that people don't know about, right? That are like for example, in Lawrence, when I'm teaching labor history, in Lawrence in 1860, there's a factory building that collapses. It literally collapses when it's full of workers in operation, and it kills 110 people. Most people around here don't know that ever happened.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I like teaching. I don't like, obviously, that happened, but I like teaching about it to make a point about how cheaply we, not just we in the United States, but we in general in a capitalist economy, how little regard we have for human beings. That this building falls and kills all these people, and it's not more well known. And it's not something that's taught. It's not something that's a lesson learned. People did very little in the aftermath to try to figure out what happened and why. Rebuilt the building on the same site and went right on about their business. And I like teaching about things like that because they become good object lessons for trying to pick apart sort of how power and authority and wealth and sort of this juxtaposition of sort of the way we think about living in Massachusetts and New England is like we're cool, but no, we have our share of these incredibly harmful events that happen. We've just been better at sort of keeping them hidden.
Audio's gonna be okay for this, or should we try to put the LVAD up?
No, I was wondering, I was using another pair of headphones. What is the history behind the offering, the Lowell Mill Girls?
Sure. Well, the Lowell Offering was a monthly magazine that was published in Lowell from 1840 to 1845. And almost all the contributors were women who worked in the mills in Lowell. And they wrote poetry, fiction, um, things like that. And so even though, you hear, 40 to 45, it had a 5-year lifespan, it was hugely influential. For instance, in 1842, Charles Dickens, the great English novelist, visited Lowell. He had come to America that year, and he spent an entire day here. And when he left, somebody handed him a stack of these magazines. And when he got back to England and he wrote a book about his time in America. I think it's called Notes on America. And he devoted an entire chapter on his day in Lowell. And in that chapter, he said that the Lowell Offering compared favorably to the best English magazines at the time. So I think he's a pretty good judge of talent. So for him to be saying that this journal produced by the Mill Girls of Lowell was qualitatively the equivalent of the best stuff coming out of England, I think is high praise for the Mill Girls. And I think it's an important point to make about Lowell. We're actually coming up on the city's bicentennial. Lowell got its charter as a town in 1826, which is kind of late for this area. The first English settlers had come here in the 1650s, but Lowell just sort of burst on the scene as this cotton manufacturing center in the 1820s, and it grew very rapidly. But it wasn't like there was anybody here before that. For instance, in all of downtown Lowell, before the mills came, there were only about a dozen houses. So it was just really kind of pasture, vacant land. So the people that owned the mills, that created them, needed a workforce. And the model they adopted was to go around New England to farms and try to convince the farmer to let his daughter, usually between the ages of 13 and 18, come here and work in the mills. And what father would allow that? So they had to create this structure of boarding houses that had older women in charge. Going to church was mandatory, and they provided all of these opportunities to do cultural activities, to see plays and parks and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong, they were working 12 hours a day, and it was hugely difficult work. But, the reality was they were working very hard back on the farm, but they were under the control first of their father and then their husband. And for all the work they were doing, they weren't getting paid anything. So when they came here, they had a lot more independence, and they were getting money for their labor, which was really very empowering. And many of them would work for a couple of years and then would return back to the farm. So I think when you realize that when they were producing this magazine, they were doing that after having worked in a very difficult physical job for 12 hours a day, it makes their work even all the more amazing.
They are in Lowell right now. There's a lot of statues involving the Mill Girls. Do you have a favorite one, and why?
I guess it might be one called The Worker, which is right across the street from LTC. It's made out of granite, and it features a laborer working on the canals. So that sort of the background of the statue is blocks of granite, which is what was used to line the walls of the canals. And this mill worker, at least when the statue was first created and it's being repaired, he has this great big pry bar where he's moving that. And the reason that I think connects with me is that let's see, 7 out of the 8 of my great-grandparents all came to Lowell from Ireland in the 1890s. And the one that didn't came from Ireland in the 1850s. And the men among them, my great-grandfathers, all started here as laborers. And then they went on to do other things, but they got their start probably working in the canals or building mills or building street. And so that's why, I mean, I have sort of a personal connection with that statue.
Good evening, Lowell Telemedia Center viewers, fans, superfans, groupies, haters. I'm your host, Cam Cameronson, bringing you our first and possibly only annual LTC Trivia Game Show. With me, I'm joined by Nicole Rossi, an intern at Lowell Telemedia Center, Vanessa Bazile, an intern at Lowell Telemedia Center, and Nerio Pizarro, an intern at Lowell Telemedia Center. Hey, you guys happen to know each other?
No.
Oh, never met them or saw them before.
So for tonight, our categories are separated into locations and landmarks, famous figures, Lowell history, and arts and culture. Nicole, you can start us off.
All right, I'm going to go with arts and culture for 200.
Starting in 1990, this yearly tradition brings in thousands of people for live musical performances. Nicole.
I'm going to go with Lowell Folk Festival.
That's correct.
I'm going to school all you guys today.
We
All
shall
right,
see.
locations and landmarks for 200.
This restaurant in downtown Lowell was a safe haven for the lesbian and gay community for the city through the 50s and 60s.
Well, across the street, the Moody Gardens, they were at rock bottom. So they invited the band there.
Yeah.
So the band came and along came everybody else.
Yeah. Oh, what are the Moody Street Gardens?
That's correct.
Yes. All right, locations and landmarks for 400.
This statue depicts an Irish immigrant named Howe who led workers to widen canals and construct the nearby textile mills. Nerio.
Ha! Got it first.
I guess it might be one called The Worker, sort of the background of the statue with blocks of granite, which is what was used to line the walls of the canals.
It's the worker.
That's correct.
See? Faster is better.
We're still early in this game.
Nicole and Nerio got started off with the first few good questions, and Vanessa just wasn't having it.
Okay, this isn't fair. How come they get flashbacks and I don't? I'm literally losing. Like, I don't.
Well, maybe you should have given more interviews. Nerio. With novels such as On the Road and The Dharma Bums, this author was born in Lowell on Lupine Road.
Who is Jack Kerouac?
You got it. This type of soda was invented in 1876 and was the first soda to be mass-produced in the U.S.
What is Moxie Soda?
There it is.
Ooh.
This actor from the city was the first ever to receive 10 Academy Award nominations, winning 2 of them.
Antonio Banderas?
Who is Betty Davis?
You got it. This conglomerate spanning 5 miles and joined by factories, canals, and parks, dedicated to the first industrialized city.
What is Lowell National Historic Park?
Correctamundo. And this is our daily double for today. Remember, this question is worth double the points. Let's take a look. Here you write the answer, and the contestants supply the question. I knew I was forgetting to change one more.
You forgot.
No.
You forgot.
Bro.
I would literally rather have every single video we've ever put out, every single episode get corrupted than stay here any more than play this stupid game with you. This is the dumbest idea we've ever come up with.
You know, I didn't spend 5 years at Game Show University to be disrespected like this, so if you don't quit it, I'm going to divide your points against the others. And you know what? Points go to Nerio, all right? And you're getting 600, not the 1,200. Next question.
I'm going to go with arts and culture for 800.
This monthly publication of poetry, essays, fiction, and ballads were mainly written by female mill factory workers in the 1840s.
The Lowell Offering was a monthly magazine that was published in Lowell from 1840 to 1845. And almost all the contributors...
Why are there so many flashbacks? Vanessa,
What is the offering?
you got it.
Did you just use the flashback?
How hypercritical you are. How ironic. Hold on, no.
Well, tonight was a mess. Vanessa somehow came out on top after being down for most of the game, so congrats, Vanessa, but I think tonight proved why we probably shouldn't continue doing this. I'll catch you guys next time. I'm Cam Cameronson. Have a great night.